Hey guys, welcome to Angster Management. We're going to do a flyover today. This is the Richat Structure in Mauritania, Africa. This is a geological structure that at one time was most likely used as a point of a civilization or multiple civilizations. Right now what we're looking at is the elevations, and the elevation tells us that the Richat structure itself is lower than the surrounding area, which means that when the floods occurred that created this, the water came from above. And if you look at this dark area in the middle of green, yellow with rings of red, you want to think that those are walls and all that, but that's basically just a well in the middle. And all of the water that inundated from underneath those mountains above it went beneath the ground through the aquifers, and the hole in the middle of the Richat structure is where it came from. And as it bubbled up, it created rings of minerals and other deposits of salts and various minerals and salts that you would expect when you see something bubbling up from the ground. So we've got a lot of calcium, a lot of salt, a lot of various minerals, and that's what creates all the rings. When it was full of water, in the middle here, everything that came out of the middle would have had to percolate and bubble throughout it and over those ridges where you see the red rings. So what happened here was, as this water came up from above, in this area right here where I'm showing with the mouse, it went under these hills and across the bay that is white and came out into the Richat structure right here. And it bubbled out for, it could have been a year, it could have been thousands of years, who knows? I mean, as long as it took for that water to kind of work its way out of there. So let's kind of zoom in a little bit here now on Google Earth. So one of the first things I'm going to zoom in on is a similar feature to the Richat structure that's nearby. And that's right here. And if you look and zoom in, you can see it's almost like a baby version. So we know that this particular type of structure is common here. And you can see where the water flowed out of it on the bottom left. So the Richat is not exclusive. It's just the largest of many features around here, and probably the one weak spot where all the water was able to come out. Now, this bay that we're looking at here, this bay had water in it. The white is all the salt, and the water came from the right towards the left and filled that bay. So this structure is probably some sort of pen or a small walled city. It might have been a fortress or whatever they call it on the Google Earth, but that's hard to say. So we're looking at basically an overview here of some of the sites that people have found. Now, some of these may be older, some of them may be younger. This site, I think in particular, is probably a mixture. I think you can see there's some remains of some linear structures and walls that were probably wiped out by the flood. But also you have to figure those white deposits, that's probably salt. And that white deposit is either calcium or salt or something useful. And so the people who were here later actually kind of hang out in that area and mined that. Now, when you look around the edge, you see what looks like mountains. Those are not mountains. Those are basically what would be ripples of the heavier minerals that formed walls around the outside of the Richat structure. So we're going to go in the middle, and this is what you see when you find a well that's dried up or a large spring. You'll see there's sort of a spot in the middle where clearly the water was coming up and out of and percolating. You'll see multiple colors, you'll see minerals, you'll see deposits, but you'll see a lot of water action coming from that, working its way outward. You'll see bizarre ripples and dunes, things you would see in a tidal flat. But here we also see straight lines. And straight lines means someone was there. So over here, we're looking at sort of a river. Would have flowed from right to left. Here we're looking at a spot where there was some sort of either an animal pen or something like we see in South Africa with those features that are there, the stone circles. It's probably very similar to that. Probably post-cataclysm. Now this here is definitely post-cataclysm. These are probably mines of some kind where they're mining specific minerals or salt or whatever is in the land there. Something like that in the middle of that black flat. My guess is they're scraping whatever that black material is. And for some reason, it just happened to be a triangle in shape. There's another one to the left of it as well. So I'm just going to zoom in on a couple of things that looked unusual. That looks like some sort of structure that might have been buried and wrecked. Up here you look and you see almost what looks like wreckage or rubble. So that could have been an area where there were buildings, and that's all that's left of it. So the structure itself, you can see the water flowed out of it and to the southwest. And what that means is it came from above, percolated out of the middle of the Richat structure, and then flowed out of it and broke that bottom left wall out of it, and the water flowed out. And it basically just flowed and flowed and flowed, and that was probably the last point of water flowing after this event, all the way out to the Atlantic Ocean. And you can see where water flowed over whatever period of time it was, and then some puddled here and created these salt deposits. This was probably a bay or something like you would see in Texas, where you have miles and miles of beach, where the water and the tide come in and it's only a few inches deep. This one kind of caught my eye. It looks like some sort of, area where they might have had like a bay or a harbor. And in the corner, there looks like some sort of rubble where there might have been a small city on that harbor at the point. There's some weird chevron shapes there. Then you come down here and it almost looks like these were little ports or little docking areas or places where when this was all full of water, that ships would have been able to sail to and meet up and pick up and drop off materials. Typical trade routes. And they were all formed by the cataclysm that occurred previous to this. So here we have a circular feature in the area over to the right. And if you zoom in, it kind of looks like a depression. My guess would be that this was some sort of city. And what happened was it was located so that the water filled it up and it just sat in there. Now you can look over here and you can see where the water rounding that ridge right there was just running along and creating canyons. There's sort of a weird feature here. It's hard to say what that is or if that was just filled with water, but it definitely doesn't fit into the landscape. So another possible point of habitation. Now when you come over here, you see this bizarre ridge sticking up. It's almost as if that was definitely the edge of a bay or an ocean. And then you see all these strange striations in the ground, which I don't think anybody has figured out what those came from. And I can't think of any geological process that creates those. And you can see this is all flat. This isn't really much of a mountainous area except for this particular thing here in the middle that looks to me like a wrecked structure of some sort. You can see part of the outer wall is still intact. And then on some of the high and low spots, this is a little bit of a hill here. There's a structure on top of that that's wrecked. Now we're going to take a look at the ring end on, and you can see it basically built up walls around the bubbling material in the middle that once it went over that ridge where I'm at with my mouse, ran down and created new channels on the outside. But this center area, you can see clearly this was probably a lot like quicksand for a long time. And whatever was there, buildings, structures, cities, they all just sank into it. Beneath that sand, that looks exactly like the center of a bubbling spring. So that's most likely what this was a big bubbling spring, and the water came in from the north, went underneath the ground through the aquifers and bubbled up in the middle. Here's another structure of some sort, a little bit northeast of it. Looks to me like a burnt out volcano. So we know there's volcanoes in the area in Libya and all the surrounding areas. There are many volcanoes. Some of them are alive still. Here's another one. This one actually is still active. Just so you know, there's volcanoes in the area. So it's also possible that the Richat structure was a volcano at one point, and the water inundated under the volcano and pushed all of the minerals and salts and everything in the volcano upwards out of it, where it just poured out and created that structure. So we zoom out of Africa and we see the Sahara Desert. It is not a very friendly place for humans. So at one point that was all green. So we don't know what happened. You know, the ancient alien guys think that there were nuclear bombs, and some people think comets, probably just climatological changes. And when the floods came across this and just wiped all the vegetation and cities and everybody away, nothing really grew back because it just covered everything with sand. So here's a modern city. You can see how the modern city is. It's just a bunch of small buildings and little areas where they either have fish farms or, you know, things that are hardy and can grow in these drought conditions. And, you know, they have to get water somehow here. So there is definitely got to be water under the ground, but that's what a modern city looks like right now. So there's another circular structure here that I found. Very similar to it. You can see how the stuff bubbled up in the middle. And that is probably the beginnings of a similar structure that just wasn't able to complete itself. Just wasn't enough water. Now you can see bays. Here's a bay, and you can see where as it filled up, all the water ran from the outside into it and created ripples and all that stuff that you see when you go down to the beach. That to me looks like the remains of some sort of city. Walls, parallel walls. Now this looks like some sort of mineral spring. Everything is a whitish color in the middle like salt, so that would have been the last place the water was. That's where you're going to find all your salt, where the water was last. And you can clearly see that there was water here more recently than a lot of the areas that we've been looking at. So this was probably underwater much more recent. And as you go, you can see that there's definitely like a mud flat look to it. Like when you go out to places where they have those 12 to 15 foot tides, you see mud flats like that actually have swirls and structure to them. Now here you can see some of the areas where we had some mountain ranges and stuff. Now this is to the northeast. This isn't in the structure. This is another structure I think is a non-active volcano in southwest Libya. But we're trying to look at places where the water would have came from. Now we're going to go down and we're going to look at another spot. Looks like it might have been an active volcano at some point. It might have shifted over to trying to form like the Richat structure, but just didn't have enough water to get it done. So it's much smaller. Here's another spot where there's a heavy deposit of something dark, probably a volcano. And what happened to these volcanoes is when that water came through, it's basically like throwing water on a campfire. You're going to end up with a lot of charcoal and burnt things that, you know, when it gets extinguished, it just stays in one place. That looks like the ruins of some sort of structures there as well. So here's another little ridge with a non-active volcano. And in the top middle there, you see another structure that looks like it might have been some sort of Richat structure to be, trying to get its thing done, and it just didn't have enough water to do it. And a lot of these could just be extinguished volcanoes. Here's another one. This to me looked like it might have been some sort of like a pond or a depression. Maybe even man-made, maybe even a man-made lake right there in the middle of those two ridges. And you've got some more of the non-active volcanoes. There's a little line of them. And a lot of the black what you see is basalt deposits, probably because it's below them, it was probably pushed across, and then the basalt was deposited. There's that circular structure again. I like to come back to that so the ones you've just been looking at kind of are fresh in your mind. And you can see here, this is what the Richat structure was probably looking like about a few hours into the cataclysm, as the water started to bubble up from the middle of it, carrying all those minerals that were underground. That's why there's so many colors and so many different textures at the Richat structures, because it all came from underground, all the strata that was there. So here's where the water started to come in. You can actually see where these cliffs were inundated in the water. You can actually see where it flowed through there when this cataclysm was occurring. And it sort of washed all the sand away and left the basalt from ancient volcanic events or cataclysms that happened before. You can literally see right here where these waterways end. That is where the water went into the ground and down below into the aquifers. And then that water would have bubbled up from inside of the Richat structure. So this is clear evidence of water flowing into an underground structure of some kind. Possibly volcanic lava tubes, possibly an aquifer. Some way a lot of water went in right there. And then they just stop. Rivers don't do that. Rivers don't just stop unless they go underground. And this one on the left kind of winds its way down. It got a little farther along, but when you zoom out, you can see right where all that water went, right in there, right there. Went in, went under, through these areas, which were boiling rivers at some point, and it just went under the ground. And when it decided to come out, we had our Richat structure. Now, of course, you've got bays here. Some of the water went up and over the cliffs, and that's why that white bay on the left is there. That's a salt bay. Salt bay. So I see a little bit of blue in there. I see a little bit of aqua, some gray. Each of those is indicating a different mineral, different type of salt. Not like anything in the area. You don't see anything in the area with blue and gray, so that clearly came from underground. This is the bay that I think probably survived maybe even longer than the cataclysm. It might have actually been around because you can see there's some linear structures in there. I think that it might have been the site of a pretty widespread city. And the reason that it turned into a bay was because it was built in the middle of a depression. And that would help them avoid the sandstorms when they occurred. Sort of like Mexico City was back in the time of the Aztecs. They would have built their city right in the middle of the bay, and everything would have been fed by the bay. So you can just see all the water that was moving around and finding its way around on the top of the ground. You can only imagine how much water was down below moving, pushing through that aquifer. Trillions of gallons.